Resourceful Designer, episode 100, What Being a Graphic Designer Means to Me.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, wait a minute, did he just say episode 100? Wow, I can't believe I've done that many intros for this podcast. Isn't that amazing? Oh, and congratulations to you too, Mark.
Well, thank you so much, Wayne. And thank you for doing such an amazing job on all my intros. You've been with me since the beginning, giving little glimpses to my listeners so that they get to know me a little bit better. So thank you for your contribution to the podcast, Wayne. Now, if you would like to hire Wayne's sultry voice for a project of your own, you can find him at mediavoiceovers.com and tell him Mark sent you. And while I'm dishing out some thank yous, I have to mention Justin, my audio editor. It's Justin's job to make sure that I sound as good as I do, and that you don't hear all the goof-ups or word stumbles that I make while I'm recording these episodes, because there are a few. Justin's been editing Resourceful Designer since episode 55, and thanks to him, I've been able to free up over an hour of my time each week to concentrate on my business instead of editing this podcast. So thank you very much for that, Justin. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you. There are so many other things that you could be doing right now besides listening to me. But you chose to press play on this podcast, and for that, I am extremely grateful. You know, I was getting ready to launch Resourceful Designer in the fall of 2014, but I was a little bit hesitant at the time. I didn't know if it was such a good idea. And I kept thinking to myself, why would anyone want to listen to what a designer from small town Ontario, Canada has to say? And that doubt caused me to invent excuses and put things off, and it prevented me from launching for an entire year. Now, I finally put that first episode out in the fall of 2015, September 30th to be exact. And I told myself at that time, if I can get 50 people to listen to the podcast, I'd be happy, and it would encourage me to keep going. Well, little did I know at that time that 2 years later, I would be reaching thousands of designers around the world. So once again, I want to thank you. Wherever you are in the world, at whatever stage of your design career that you are at, I'm grateful that you choose to spend a little bit of time each week with me. Now, this is a milestone episode, and it's going to be a little bit different. So if this is your first time ever listening to an episode of Resourceful Designer, please keep in mind that this is not your typical episode. There's no sponsors, there's no resource of the week or question of the week, no iTunes reviews or any of the other stuff that I normally do in every episode. Nope, this one is going to be my chance. I am using my platform to tell you what being a graphic designer means to me. And I'm hoping that in a way, you can relate to some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. Because whether you've been doing this for 28 plus years like I have, or if you're new to the game, we all have something in common, and that's our creativity and our love for this profession. Now, before I get into what I wanted to talk about today, about what being a graphic designer means to me, I just want to give you a little bit of my bio. In case you haven't read it, my bio is actually on Resourceful Designer, but you might not have ever read it before. So I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, the short version. I didn't start out wanting to be a designer. In fact, I wanted to create television commercials. That was my goal in high school. Towards the end, when I was trying to find what career I wanted to do, I was really interested in creating television commercials. But the university I would have to attend in Toronto, Ontario was, I was going to say too expensive, but that's not really the right term. It wasn't necessarily too expensive. I just didn't have the money to attend. So I decided that I was going to take a year and save up some money in order to go to this school. Now, I knew myself enough to realize that if I quit school after high school and decided to work full-time for a year, there was a good chance I might not ever go back to school because school was never my strong point. And I realized that of myself. So I decided that maybe I should still do something. Now, luckily, when I graduated school, my local college gave me a bursary. I actually won a bursary that would cover 1 month's tuition at the local college. For whatever program I wanted to take, my first semester of tuition was paid for. So I decided that why not? I'm living at home. I might as well attend the local college. It wouldn't cost me anything other than maybe some books and some supplies. So I looked through their list of courses on what I can take. And there was a few different options that I thought about. I mean, it was only going to be for 1 semester, maybe 1 year at the most. And I stumbled on the graphic design program. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to go into television commercials, there's some creativity and some stuff in there. Maybe there's something in the graphic design program that I might learn that could help me down the road when I'm doing TV commercials. So that's the course I chose to enroll in. Now, again, the full short version is I started that first semester with the intention that I was going to last either that 1 semester or the year and then move on. But I fell in love with what graphic design can do, what we were capable of achieving through manipulating colors and shapes and type. And I realized the power that graphic designers have in shaping the world around us. And I decided after that first year of college that maybe I do like this course. It wasn't just an interim thing. And I gave up on the idea of doing TV commercials, and I decided to stick with graphic design. And I have never looked back. Through college, all my years working at the print shop, and all my years working by myself in my own company, I have never been happier than working in graphic design. And I hope that you, being a designer as well, feel something similar, that there's a passion, a calling involved in this, whether you knew it from the get-go. Maybe you were 3-4 years old and you knew that you were going to do something in this line. Or maybe you're like me and you stumbled upon this. Maybe you're somebody that had a career before this and decided later in life to switch to design. And that's wonderful. But regardless of how you got there, it's that love and passion that keeps you wanting to design. And that love and passion creates something in us that anybody who is not a designer just doesn't get. And that's really what this episode is about. I created a list. I've been working on this list for several months now, just adding here and there of little things that really only a designer would get, probably. Stuff like driving down the road and looking up at a billboard. Most people will look up at a billboard and see the message, whether it's for a restaurant or maybe it's for a charity or it's some store or whatever the billboard is. You see the message, you either acknowledge the message and realize that you saw it, or most of the time, people will see it and not even register that they've seen it. But as a designer, every time I go by a billboard, yes, I see the message, but I also stop to think, was it effective? Was the text easy to read? Was there too many words on the sign that I wasn't able to get the entire message while I was driving by the billboard? What sort of feelings did I get from it? Was it too busy that I had to stop and actually take my eyes off the road in order to study the billboard to figure out what it was? It's all these little things that I'm sure people that are not designers don't do, but I do it every time I see a billboard. Just like junk mail. Most people, when you pick up your mail, if you go through and there's some flyers for the local pizza joint or something about a charity or maybe an envelope from the local hospital asking for a donation, those are the type of things. Like I know my wife, when she picks up the mail, she'll get it home and then she'll go through and she'll go junk, take these things out, in the recycling bin they go. But me, on the other hand, whenever I'm sorting through the mail, I'll sort through and I'll pull out the junk mail one at a time, but I actually stop to look at each one, whether it's a pizza flyer or some advertisement for a lawyer's office or whatever it is. I will stop and I'll look at it just to admire the design. I'll flip it over to see the other side. Now, I might not have any use for whatever this junk mail is advertising, and it does end up in the recycling bin, but I always take a second or two just to admire or to see it. Who knows? Maybe there's something in there that I'll look at it and I'll go, I wonder how they did that. And study it for a minute, maybe two, just trying to figure out, was that done in Illustrator? Was that done in Photoshop? What sort of filters did they do to achieve this look? Or how exactly did they put this together? Again, these are things that designers do, but nobody else will do. Another thing that I don't know if you can relate to, but do you ever get frustrated when you see something, whether it's junk mail or a billboard or a menu at a restaurant or whatever, when you look at a font and you think to yourself, I know this font, and it's bugging you because you can't think of the name? For years, I would have that issue. I would get somewhere and I would open up. We'd go to a restaurant, I'd open up the menu and I'd look and I'd see the font that they're using for the headings. And I'd go, I know that font. I have that font on my computer. What font is it? And I was distracted that way. Who but a designer would do that? Now, luckily, as I mentioned earlier in, I believe it was last week's podcast, the Resource of the Week, and a blog post that I just wrote about the new What the Font app, that one is helping me out. I've actually used it this week when I was out. I was visiting my dad at his retirement home, and there was a flyer for a hearing aid company. And I actually pulled out the app because I wanted to know what font they had used. And it showed me exactly what font it was. So with the app, that helps out. But I don't know, has that ever happened to you before where you see a font somewhere and you say, I know what font that is, but you can't put a name to it? Now, I mentioned menus in a restaurant, and I don't know, maybe it's just something about being a designer that when you look through a restaurant menu, first of all, out of everything that is designed out there, I think restaurant menus, for some reason, are the most prone to errors. I mean, other than printed newspapers and magazines and that, where you'll see spelling errors and all that, menus, for some reason, are most prone to errors. And for some reason, being a designer, whenever I spot an error, it's almost like I get a little bit giddy or happy. It's like, ooh, look, I found an error that some other designer made. Not that I wish ill on them or that I hope that they make a mistake. It's just thinking that, oh, there's an error, and secretly saying to myself, I wouldn't have made that mistake. You know, whether it's leading or maybe some kerning that wasn't done right, or it could be anything, a line that should follow through. You notice that maybe every single heading has an underline, but there's one heading that the underline is missing. That, just little things like that. I don't know, for some reason, I just get a little thrill about spotting design errors. Again, who but a designer would feel that way? Continuing on restaurant menus, I don't know about you, but there has been many times where my wife, my family, even with some friends, we'll go to a restaurant and we'll sit down, and either I might be the last person to choose what I'm going to eat just because instead of looking at the different food items on the menu, I'm actually admiring the design of the menu, looking through to see how they did it, what fonts they choose, the pairing, how they divided up the different sections. Either that, or after the server comes and takes our meal, takes our order, they usually pick up all the menus. And there has been many times where I've asked, do you mind if I hold on to this menu? I'd like to keep looking at it. And it's not because I want to look at what sort of meals the place is serving. It's because I really want to see the design. Sometimes they will have a story. There's a lot of restaurants, especially if they have some sort of history behind them. They might have a page at the beginning of the menu that says the story about the restaurant. Well, you know what? Somebody took the time to design that, to lay that page out. Well, I'm going to give them the courtesy of reading that story. Nobody else at my table would have, but for some reason, being a designer, I appreciate the effort they put into that story. I'm going to take the time to read it. I'm going to take the time to look through every page, even the sections of meals that I'm not interested in, just to see how everything was laid out. Not to mention just the whole presentation. Is the menu a leather-bound menu? How is it bound? Do they have some sort of tassel or ribbon? I'm looking at all this stuff, admiring it while we're at the restaurant. Again, who but a designer would do something like that? Now, restaurants are not only menus when it comes to design. I will often stop while walking down the sidewalk, and I've annoyed my wife a lot of times because we'll be walking down a sidewalk. Maybe we're visiting a city somewhere and we're walking down a sidewalk, and all of a sudden I'll see one of those A-frame signs on the sidewalk that somebody hand-lettered with chalk or with marker or something. And I'll stop just to admire the sign. It's not that I'm hungry or whatever it is. Maybe it's not a restaurant. Maybe it's a little boutique store and they have a sign out there. I will stop and admire the person's handwriting because I know it's not something I can do. I don't have the right type of handwriting to do that sort of thing, but I can admire it. And we've stopped in front of taverns and pubs where I don't drink, my wife doesn't drink, so we have no reason to go into a tavern or a pub. But I will stop and look at their little menu that they put out, especially a handwritten menu or a hand-painted menu, just to admire the craft that went into creating this thing. And my wife has often like, what are you doing? Why'd you stop? And I'll tell her, it's just, look how beautiful this is. Look at how the curves of the letters, look how well the layout is. Everything is perfectly proportioned. Who else but a designer does that, stops to admire these sort of things? When I go to an appointment at a doctor's office or the car, if I'm waiting in the waiting room while my car is being serviced, I love looking through the magazines they have. Not because their stories are interesting, because in all honesty, most of the magazines are way outdated. I think my doctor's office still has magazines dating back to the 90s. But I love flipping through those magazines just to see the ads, especially the older magazines. If you pick up a magazine from the 80s or the 90s and you look through at what the ads looked like, it's really interesting. And to see how things have progressed and to see how some things are still being done the same way that they've always been. So I love flipping through old magazines. Now, speaking of flipping through magazines or going to stores and all that, one thing that I love doing as a designer is spotting stock images. I almost make a game out of it. We're driving around and I'm looking at billboards, I'm looking at storefronts, and I'll see maybe a picture of a family and I'll go, oh, I know that image. I've seen it on this, or maybe I've actually used that image before in stock photos or in a project. I've used that stock photo. And there are so many times where I will spot something. And it's funny because I'll tell my wife, like, it's this big thing. It's like, oh, you see that photo over there? That's a stock photo. I know they sell it on such and such a site, or I've used that on such and such a client's job. And my wife really doesn't care. My kids don't care. But to me, it's a big game of spotting these things. In fact, there's this one photo of a woman that I seem to spot everywhere. I don't know if she's just super popular or she makes really good poses. I've actually used this woman myself in some jobs. I think there's 2 separate clients that I've used 2 different stock photos, and it just so happened that it'd be the same woman. And then I see this woman in magazine ads. I see her in online ads, in Facebook ads. I see her on billboards. And it's just one of those things. I love spotting these things. And that's the designer in me, looking for these things. In fact, you know what? I'm going to do something here. This is the 100th episode of the podcast. I'm going to put out a little contest. Sorry, I'm just doing this spur of the moment. I mentioned there's this one woman. I'll give you a hint. She's a brunette. I don't get a lot of comments on Resourceful Designer. I always share the show notes in every episode saying if you have a comment or you'd like to talk about it, visit resourcefuldesigner.com, in this case, /episode 100. Well, I don't get a lot of comments on the episodes I put out. So for this 100th episode, maybe to help get some comments, I'm going to make a little contest. If you can send me a link, it doesn't matter to what stock photo site it is, to who you think I'm talking about. Now, the only hint I will give you is it's a young woman. I would say she's in her probably early 20s to mid 20s, and she's brunette. If you can send me a link to who you think I'm talking about, and this woman, I've seen her image on a whole bunch of different stock photo sites. So I know that it's not just one stock photo site. She's on several of them, the low costs one up to the high costs one. And I have seen her photo all over the place in media. So if you can leave a comment on Resourceful Designer with a link, you don't actually have to purchase the photo, but as long as you can provide a link to a stock photo site, which with the photo of the brunette woman that you think I'm thinking about, I will give the first person that can correctly identify her a $100 Amazon gift card to wherever you are in the world. What you tell me what Amazon store you want it from, and I will give you that would be $100 US Amazon gift card to the Amazon store of your choice. Now, the only thing I will stipulate is if you're going to leave a comment, includes one link. If you put a link to 10 or 20 different brunettes just to try to get it, I'm not even going to approve that comment. I'm just going to delete it. So you need to do only one. And the first person to get it, I will give this gift card to. And once somebody does, then in the show notes, I will actually add a section to the show notes with photos of this woman. I don't know if this is a good idea for a contest. I was talking about this stock image thing, and this just popped into my head that, hey, this is the 100th episode. Why don't I throw in a contest here to see if I can actually get more comments on the website? Because as I said, I don't get a lot of comments. I've put out 100 episodes, and there's probably 10 episodes that have received comments so far. And I understand that. This is a podcast. It's not a blog post that you're reading, and then at the end of reading, you would leave a comment. You actually have to go out of your way to leave a comment. So this is kind of a way to entice you to visit the website if you haven't done so already and leave a comment for this episode at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 100. And once again, just provide one link to a stock photo site, or not to the site, but to the actual image of who you think I'm talking about. A 20-something brunette woman who, for some reason, her image is being used in so many different media outlets and advertising outlets around the world. So let's see what comes of this. Now, one thing about being a designer is that we love to criticize. Now, if you went through school or if you've been doing this long enough, you know that constructive criticism is essential to our growth as creatives, as designers, as just being successful in this industry. We need to take that constructive criticism to better ourselves. If we just design stuff and everybody said, oh, it's good, it's good, it's good, there would be no reason to strive to be better. But every time we get some constructive criticism, it gives us that little boost that makes us a better designer. Now, that's receiving criticism, but as designers, we love giving it. Now, I know in the Facebook group, which if you're not a member, you can join by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/group. In there will often be times where people will post a design and they'll say, like, here's something I'm working on. What do you think? And it's really funny to see all the different opinions that designers have. Sometimes somebody will post 4 different versions. They'll say, which one do you like? A, B, C, or D? Well, one person will say, well, A is the only one. B, C, and D are no good. But somebody else will say, ooh, C is the one to go with. It's the only one. Or, I don't like A for this reason, and somebody else doesn't like B for that reason. And it's all subjective. Every designer has their own opinion. That's why we come together. Every time there's a big brand that redoes their look, whether it's a national or international company like Pepsi-Cola or a car company or whatever, we designers love to go in and I'd say criticize or give constructive criticism about the logo, how we would do it different, what we don't like about it. What we do like about it, we love giving our input on how we would improve it. And there's nobody but designers that do that. Yes, there's people who would say, oh, I really don't like their new logo. But that's usually as far as they would go. They might say the logo doesn't work or it doesn't fit with their image. But only a designer would start saying how they would make the logo better or what they would have done different. And sometimes designers can be mean, be downright nasty when it comes to it. But I still love the fact that as designers, no matter how subjective our look is, we love giving opinions on other stuff, whether it's good or bad. I love the Facebook group and the constructive criticism that comes about in it. I've seen some wonderful designs that came out of asking for opinions and the designer following through. I've done it myself. There was a logo I was doing recently for somebody, and I posted it in the Facebook group because there was 2 different variations. I wasn't sure. They were so subtle, the difference, that after staring at them for so long, I didn't know anymore which one was better. And I posted in the group, and I got a lot of feedback, and it helped me make the decision on which one I should go with. And sometimes those decisions are not even things you had thought of. Sometimes somebody will make a suggestion about a design or a logo or a brand or whatever it is that's posted. Sometimes somebody will make a suggestion that nobody else had thought of, and it's the right direction to go in. It's almost like designing by committee, but you being the main designer on the project have final say in everything. So it can be very valuable. And when you do use other designers to help you out, your designs become that much better and you learn in the process. So I love the fact that not only do we criticize logos and critique them, but we learn and we build our creativity by doing so and by looking at what other people are saying about the same logos. Now, speaking of logos or just brands in general, one thing that I know I do, and it's because of my design background, is when I go into a store and I need to buy a product and there's lots of different ones to choose from, and I don't have any bases to choose one over the other. Like say I'm going into the store because I need to buy bar soap to wash myself with. Well, I know some people, they might have a preference where I always buy this brand of soap or this one here because it has more moisturizer. Well, I don't know if it's just me or my generation, but really, I don't care. Soap to me is soap. As long as it can clean me, I'm happy. But when I go into the store to buy a bar of soap, I will look at the price. And to me, there's no sense paying double the price for a bar of soap when you can get one at half the price. But while within the same price range, I will always pick out the one that has the better design on it. To me, it's just thinking that this company put the effort into designing a really nice package. And I like this package design over the other ones, so that's the one I'm going to buy. The same thing goes with cereal boxes and other things in the grocery store. Whenever I'm going through and I don't know what to get, a lot of times the package will influence me. And you might say that, well, that's the goal of any good design is to influence the buyer. But it's influencing me in a different way because I'm a designer. I actually look at it and I will appreciate what they did. I'll look at a box of crackers. That's something, crackers, I don't have preference. When I go into the cracker aisle at the grocery store and I need to buy a box, I will also often look at the boxes and just say, well, which one appeals to me more? Not necessarily the flavor of the cracker or the shape of the cracker, but just the design on the box. And I'm looking at it from a design perspective. Is the design something that's outdated? Is it something clever? Did they do something that I might not have thought of? And all of these things help me make a decision. And I know that's my design background that is doing that. Yes, other people go in and they might pick a box because it's a pretty box, but they're not studying the package like I do and like I believe other designers do. Now, sometimes this studying of stuff can come back and bite you in the behind. There was a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I, we were in Ottawa, Ontario, which is Canada's capital, in case you didn't know. And we were at a shopping mall. This is a big shopping mall with, it's all indoor store, so it's all enclosed. And sometimes my wife likes to just go into stores and browse. And I will often follow her into stores, but sometimes I'll just sit on the bench outside the stores while she goes in to look around, and I'll listen to a podcast or look at some stuff on my phone or just look around at the people that are going by or what's happening in the mall. And there was this one day a couple of weeks ago, we were at this mall in Ottawa, and I was staring at the poster that's in the window of this one store. And I was looking at the heading on the poster and I was trying to figure out exactly how they had accomplished this because it was very complex. Like it looked like it was the letters, they had depth to them. They had a nice border. There was some nice shading and some highlights to it. And then there was a pattern within the shape of the letter. Anyways, I was studying it, trying to figure out exactly what they did. And I didn't even notice my wife coming out of the store. And she was standing next to me. And I don't know how long she was standing next to me, but I was staring at this poster, trying to figure out this heading. And then she interrupts me saying, "See something you like?" And I didn't understand. And I looked up at her. I says, "What are you talking about?" And then she looks over at the poster. I had been staring for I don't know how long at a Victoria's Secret poster of this scantily clad woman in the window of a Victoria's Secret store. And I don't know what it looked like, but here I was sitting on a bench outside staring at this poster. I didn't even notice. I was looking at the heading to try to figure out how they did this, how the designer had accomplished this look, because I was fascinated by it and wondering what it would take to recreate. But of course, my wife, all she sees me is staring at a poster of a woman in lingerie in the middle of the mall where everybody can see me. So you can see where sometimes being a designer might get you in trouble. But my wife, knowing who I am, just laughed it off. She thought it was funny. But anyways, now sometimes getting lost in something is not just at the mall or when you're out and about. Sometimes it could be while you're working. And there has been times where I've gotten so involved in a project that I've completely lost track of time. And I'm not the only one. I've heard other designers mention this before. I've done it where I'll often get up in the morning and I don't necessarily shower and get dressed right away. I'll come into my office and I'll still be in my bathrobe and I'll start working. And there has been times in the past when I know when my kids were still going to grade school and high school where the bus would drop them off. And I was still sitting in my bathrobe in front of the computer. And it wasn't till they got dropped off that I realized I never got up to have lunch. I never went to have my shower. I never did anything. I was so caught up in the project that I was losing track of time. There's been other times where my wife has gotten home from work. Like this just recently. I was working on a website. My kids are not here to be dropped off anymore. They're gone to post-secondary school, so they're not home. But there was one day I was working on a website and my wife got home and I was all surprised. I asked her, I says, what are you doing? You came home for lunch? And she goes, what do you mean lunch? She says, it's supper time. And I had been sitting there for all day long working on this thing. I was so enthralled, so into the project. I had completely skipped lunch and I didn't even notice that I had done it. I didn't even know that it was time for her to come home after work. And here I was, I hadn't gotten up from the computer. Now, how many professions are there that can say that, where you get so caught up, so enthralled with what you're working on that you completely lose track of time? I know we're not the only ones, but I'm sure this is something that designers can attest to. Now, another thing, being a designer, I've designed a few t-shirts that I sell here and there on different places on the internet. And I can tell you that being a designer, first of all, I love clever t-shirts. The messages that are just funny or a little subtle or sarcastic. I love those things. But every time I see a new one, I can't help but thinking, how could I make it look better? What can I do? Can I change the way the text is used? Maybe a different font or the treatment of the text. I love the messages, but the first thing that pops into my mind is, what would I do to make this look better? Because in all honesty, there are a lot of really clever t-shirts out there that are not very well designed. It's just people buy them because the message on them is clever, is quirky, is funny, or it has some sort of other meaning to it. And that's why they buy the t-shirt, not necessarily because it's a nice design. It's for the message. But whenever I see something like that, I can't help but look at it and go, wow, I can do so much better with that if I just did this or I did that. And that's something that, again, I don't think anybody but a designer would think that way. Anybody else would see the t-shirt and they would either go, oh, that's a clever message. Haha, I like that. Oh, I wouldn't mind having one of those shirts. Or, oh, I wouldn't wear one of those. But they're not necessarily looking at the design of the shirt the way a designer does. The same thing when you're in an airplane. Anytime I fly in an airplane, I love taking out the laminated, whatever you call it, the emergency landing instruction sheet that's in the pouch of the seat in front of you. Not because I want to know where the exits are on the plane or what happens in case of a water landing. I just love looking at the infographic, how they portray this thing, because usually there's no language because so many different people may be on the plane. They have to do it with no wording. So I love looking at these things to see how it was designed to be global or international or whatever you want to call it, so that the same message can be applied. And it's funny that every airline does it a little bit different. So every time I'm in a plane, I love looking at those things just to see what colors did they use? How did they handle the directions? How did they handle the shape of the plane and showing people where to go? the flow, and all these different parts of it. The same goes with using, like if you're going to be able to use the air masks, the drop, or use the flotation device. How do they portray these things? And it's just funny that there's no universal standard. Every airline does it a little bit differently. And I love looking at these things just to see how they were done. I love going into bookstores. Yes, I love reading books. Although lately I've been listening to a lot of books more than reading them. But I still love going into bookstores just to admire the covers on books. Some of the title treatments on book covers are really, really well designed. Especially when you get into the fantasy and sci-fi covers. I love the way they do those. Some of them are embossed, but just the title of the books, it's not just a title, it's a logo in itself. And I love doing that. Or going to, there's not so many music stores anymore, but I've been in this for a long time. I used to go when there were stores that were specifically selling CDs, cassettes, albums. I would love looking at album art just to see the creativity behind those. And again, other people will go in there because they want to see the music. They want to hear the music. But being a designer, I go in there because I want to see the design behind all that stuff. And one more thing about being a designer or just a creative person in general is I don't know if I've ever truly been bored. To me, there's always something that I can be doing, even if it's not with my hands or on a computer or anything, even mentally. Whether I'm sitting in a doctor's office for hours on end, waiting for an appointment, or on a long drive somewhere, I'm never really bored because my mind is always racing. I'm always designing. I'm always wondering about the next project I'm working on and working at it in my head. And there are so many times where, my wife would tell me, "Oh, I'm bored," or especially if you have kids, "I'm bored." And I just don't understand that because to me, as a designer, there isn't really any downtime unless I'm asleep. Or, watching TV, yes, my mind is not thinking of design when I'm watching TV. But other times, my mind is always racing, whether it's thinking about something or just designing something. I've designed entire projects in my head while taking a shower, and then just come down to the computer and take the image from my head and just put them down on the computer. And it's one of those things that I believe the creative person, whether you're a designer, you're an artist, you're a musician, or whatever, a creative person is never truly bored. There's always something they can be doing, whether it's mentally or physically. And these are all things I love about being a graphic designer. Now, of course, there are some downsides to this, like working on a project and you get stuck. Maybe you get a little bit of creative block, and that just is a roadblock to your productivity. If you have a roadblock, they say, well, try moving on to something else. But to me, whenever that happens to me, I don't get any work done. It doesn't happen very often, but if I find myself in a creative rut, I can't just move on to the next project and work on it and forget about the one that was blocking me. It is something that even if I move on to another one, it's still going to bug me and I just can't work well. The new projects, unless it's something very mundane that I have to do, I just can't get into the new project until I get past that creative slump. So that's one downside to being a designer, being a creative person, is when you do hit those creative blocks, it can really hamper your business. Now, another downside to being a designer is when you think you created something wonderful. You went out of your way. You created something that's going to be at the top of your portfolio because it is so good. And then your client looks at it either with indifference or worse yet, they don't like it and they want you to try something different. And that can be really hard, really dejecting. Worse yet, and I hate it when this happens, and I know it's happened to all of us, is if the client asks to see maybe 2 or 3 different designs and you present one that you think is wonderful, it's the best design in the world, another one that is, hey, that's a really good design, and then the third one that you just threw together because you told them that you'd give them 3. Well, Murphy's Law always says that the client will end up picking that third one, the one that you didn't like, the one that you spent no time really thinking about, which you shouldn't actually be showing the client in the first place. If you tell the client that you're going to supply 3 examples of something, and after 2, you can't think of anything else, there's nothing wrong with going to the client and saying, hey, I told you I'd give you 3, but here are 2 really solid ones I have. Let me know what you think before I spend any time working on a 3rd one. And sometimes the client will just look at those 2 and say, I like this one, I like A or I like B. And then you don't even have to worry about it. So even though you promised 3 samples, or even if you promised 2 samples, if you promise 2 samples and you do one that you really like, there's nothing wrong with showing the client and saying that I haven't started the second idea yet, but I wanted to show you this first one to see what you think. If you like it, then we can just move forward with this. Sometimes the client will say, oh, I like that, but I want to see the second sample. But there's other times the client will just say, nope, this is good. You don't have to work on anything else. I love what you did. Now, another downside to being a designer is when being a designer takes you out of the moment of some sort of enjoyment of something else. Case in point, I'm a fan of The Walking Dead, the TV show The Walking Dead. Before this latest season started, which they had this whole campaign saying that this season is war, there was a TV commercial that was showing some clips and some scenes from the new season. And during the clips, they would go to a black screen. It would say this, and then they'd show some more clips. And then it would go to another one, season, then some more clips. And then another one, it's, some more clips, then all, out. And the last frame that they put up was just the word war. It was white lettering on a black background, and the W and the A were not kerned properly. There was a huge gap between the W and the A. And I was getting into the commercial because I liked The Walking Dead. I was missing it. I was watching all these clips and going, oh yeah, I can't wait for this new season. Wow, this is going to be amazing. When I saw that word war, all my excitement and my thrill about the new season was just blown right out of me, because all I could imagine after that was that bad kerning job on the word war. Now, funny enough is somebody must have complained, because a week later or something, when they re-aired the commercial, the kerning had been fixed. It wasn't like that anymore. And so somewhere along the way, somebody had said something. But when I first saw that commercial, it was one of those things. I was getting all excited about the new season of The Walking Dead. And when I saw that last frame that said war, I wasn't excited anymore. Now, I don't know if anybody who wasn't a designer or a typographer or anything like that would have noticed or would have cared, or it would have affected them the same way. But to me, it was like you had one word to put up on screen, 3 letters. You couldn't adjust it enough to make it visually pleasing, and it really took me out of it. And there have been other times where something like that has happened, where something was supposed to be like a really good thing, and I just see bad design, and it really takes me out of the moment. So maybe that's a downside to being a designer, is when bad design affects you in a negative way where it shouldn't be. But I guess it's one of the burdens we bear. So these are just some of the reasons. And I say some because there are so many reasons why I love being a designer. These are just some of the ones that I wrote down. I did have a whole bunch more that I kind of decided not to talk about on the podcast. But I just wanted to make this special episode to tell you why I love being a designer, to thank you for being a listener. I mean, we're lucky. There are not a lot of professions out there that allow someone to make a living from their creativity. Whether it's designing stuff for clients or doing something like designing t-shirts and selling them on the side just to make a little bit of money, we have those options. And no matter how advanced technology becomes or how easy it becomes to push pixels across a screen, there will always be a need for designers to make things look good. And it takes more than just talent to succeed in this business. It takes a true passion for design, which I know you have. I know that because you're listening right now to a podcast about running a graphic design business. Why else would you be doing that if you were not passionate about your career path? So once again, thank you very much for listening to Resourceful Designer. Thank you for reaching out and sharing your journey with me. If you've sent me emails or talked to me on Facebook or through any other social media, thank you so much for reaching out. I love getting those messages where people tell me how one episode affected them or the podcast in general, how they're starting their business or they're improving their business because of something, or even just a little hint or a resource that I shared, how it affected you, how it changed your day. I love getting those messages. Don't be afraid to reach out to me. If you do have anything like that, I love hearing from you. And thank you for giving me the motivation to continue with my journey of this podcast. As I mentioned at the beginning, I was going to be happy if 50 people listen to this. And now I'm getting thousands every week that tune in and listen to my podcast. And now that it's available on iHeartRadio and on Spotify and on Google Play Music, on all these different venues, it just means more and more people are discovering the podcast every day. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of your life, for allowing me to join you for a little bit of time each week to share some tips and some resources and a little bit of my experience. Whether it's similar to yours or completely different, I thank you for being a loyal listener. And I can't wait to share the next 100 episodes with you. Until next time, I am Mark Decode, wishing you all the best with your design career. And as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.